The fever had run unchecked for 11 months. Streets of Glasgow emptied into silence, shutters closed, windows fogged with the damp of sickness. Scotland's cities bled population into their graveyards and their locked wards, leaving traffic lights to change pointlessly at deserted crossings. In the Royal Infirmary, Dr. Isla McRae worked in a ward that no longer felt like a ward, more a trench. Rows of coughing patients fought for breath, the wheeze of lungs amplified by the echo of plastic respirators. Her nurses had long since abandoned pleasantries. They worked in masks and exhaustion, stripping sweat-soaked sheets from skeletal bodies and replacing them with clean ones that would last only hours. The ministry had promised nothing more. No cure, no reprieve. Then the shipment came. Unmarked crates, gray and wet from the North Sea spray, delivered at midnight. No bills of lading. No customs record. Isla herself had cut through the strapping bands, knife shaking in her hand, to reveal vials nested in foam. The liquid shimmered faintly, not clear but prismatic, as if refracting colors the eye wasn't meant to name. Under the ward lamps, the vials almost hummed, a vibration at the edge of hearing or perhaps at the edge of thought. She had argued. She had shouted. She had demanded provenance, manufacturer, some trace of human hands in the design. None came. The ministry's representative, a pale man with a voice as clipped as a typewriter, simply said, "You administer or you bury." So Isla administered. The first patient was a dock worker named Callum Fraser, his lungs so ravaged he had been given hours. The needle slid into his arm, vein collapsing with dehydration. He did not stir when the vaccine entered him. His body jolted a minute later, hard enough that Isla's assistant, Nurse Brodie, tried to pin him down, but the man flung Brodie across the ward like a rag, crashing into an enforced stand. The entire row of patients screamed. "Hold him." Isla snapped, though her own hands shook. She grabbed Callum's wrist, ice cold, and pressed it down to the cot. He convulsed again, then fell still, breathing in deep, steady rhythm. Isla leaned over him, shining her penlight across his eyes. The fever was gone. The dilation was wrong. His pupils dilated, contracted, then dilated again like an aperture searching for focus. Callum opened his mouth and exhaled. His breath steamed white in the cold of the ward, though the room was warm. Hours later he sat upright, demanding food. His hands no longer trembled. His voice had resonance that made the other patients listen. When he turned his head, he seemed to hear things Isla did not: the faint drip of a leaking pipe in the next ward, the shuffle of boots outside the quarantine door. Within 2 days, every inoculated patient improved. Not merely stabilized but surged past convalescence. Men who could not lift their heads now walked. Women who had wasted to bone now carried their children again. But something threaded through them, an unfamiliar quiet. They did not chatter. They did not weep. They moved with intent, as if following instructions unspoken. It was on the third night Isla noticed the alien concept. She found Callum awake, sitting cross-legged on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His hands traced patterns in the air, slow, deliberate shapes. The air shimmered faintly where his fingers passed, not light, not heat, but a bending of perception. Isla blinked hard, and the shimmer dissolved, leaving nothing but the faint copper taste in her mouth. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Callum tilted his head, smiling faintly as though she had asked in the wrong language. "Waiting." He did not clarify. He lay down, eyes wide open, and did not close them for the rest of the night. By dawn, Isla had administered 40 more doses. The vaccine worked, and the ministry demanded numbers. But every patient who rose from the cot carried that same uncanny silence, that same unblinking watchfulness. And Isla could not rid herself of the sense that when she looked into their eyes, something else looked back. Nurses whispered at the supply station, voices low but urgent. Isla could hear fragments as she passed. "They don't sleep. All night, staring. Something's waiting." She did not dismiss it. She had seen it herself. Patients inoculated with the mysterious vaccine did not doze when the ward lights dimmed. Not restless, not twitching. They sat upright, back straight, as if listening for a rhythm only they could hear. Hamish Douglas, once a frail boy of 17, startled everyone that night. He gripped the steel railing of his bed, knuckles whitening, and with a quiet, precise movement, bent it inward. Metal groaned but did not break. Isla froze. "Hamish," she barked. The boy's calm face met hers. "It doesn't hurt." "What doesn't?" "The weight." He released the railing, leaving deep impressions where his fingers had pressed. His hands were unmarked, pulse steady. Nurse Brodie gaped at the display, shivering. Then Callum Fraser rose silently from his bed, walking into the aisle with perfect balance. The other vaccinated patients followed suit. A subtle vibration passed through the ward, barely perceptible but synchronized with Isla's heartbeat. The copper scent that had haunted the room since the inoculations thickened sharply. She inhaled and gagged, noticing it wasn't blood, but something alive, metallic, as though the air itself had been touched by an alien presence. "Back to bed," Isla commanded, louder than she intended. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings. The patients obeyed almost mechanically, returning to their cots as if they had never left. Hamish smiled faintly as though reassured. By the fifth night, action could no longer be avoided. A fevered patient in an unvaccinated bed convulsed, unable to breathe. Nurses rushed to assist, but Hamish moved first. He crossed the ward in 3 long strides and lifted a heavy ventilator machine as though it weighed nothing, placing it precisely on the patient. The nurses stared, too shocked to act. "He'll be fine," Hamish said. Isla's breath caught. "How did you know what to do?" He tilted his head, eyes unblinking, almost listening. "I just saw. I could feel what was needed." The copper scent thickened again. Ward doors rattled gently, though no one was outside. Isla felt a strange awareness brush past her, something vast moving beyond her senses. The patient stabilized, coughing once, and the room returned to tense quiet. The whispers continued, but Isla only watched the vaccinated patients, their stillness and sudden precision marking them as something not entirely human, or at least perceiving more than humans normally could. The vaccine had worked. That was undeniable. But whatever it had awakened in them, it was not something she could control. Detective Ewan MacLeod had the air of a man who measured every step, every glance. He traced the vaccine shipment from the quarantine dock backward, following the digital breadcrumbs that should have led to ports, warehouses, customs manifests, but found nothing. No Glasgow warehouse held a record. No Dundee freighter logged its passage. No pharmacy had ordered it. The container had arrived unmarked, seals uncut. A small crane had lowered it silently at midnight, under fog and the faint drone of patrol drones overhead. Its placement had been exact, timed for the moment the city's desperation peaked. Isla met Ewan in the dim ministry office, its walls cluttered with paperwork and the stench of recycled air. He laid out the case. A phantom shipment, one that had traversed 100 miles without leaving trace. "I've seen smuggling before," he said. "People hiding things, falsifying documents. But never this." He tapped the metal crate with a gloved hand. The touch sent a shiver through him. "It feels aware." Isla frowned. "Aware?" The vials inside the crate shimmered faintly under ultraviolet lamps, pulsing blue, almost like breathing. Ewan leaned closer. The light reflected off the glass, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker in the liquid, an image or a shadow moving independently of the room. He blinked. Nothing. She had confronted the ministry. Questions of origin, composition, safety, evaded. They insisted on more doses, faster distribution. "Every day counts," the minister said, voice clipped, eyes shifting, but he refused to answer the real questions. That night, Ewan returned to the Docklands alone, walking under mist that tangled his legs. He wanted proof of the crate's journey, of its origin. As he approached the container, the pulsing of the vials became clearer, vibrating in resonance with the dock's steel beams. A hum rose in the air, low, almost imperceptible, but prickling the skin at his neck. Then movement, something inhuman. Shadow shapes darted across the fog, impossible angles, sliding along the metal crane as though it were fluid. Ewan ducked behind stacked pallets as a figure passed by, a blur that seemed taller than a man, limbs bending in ways no human limb should. It paused, head tilted, and the pulsing light from the crate seemed to respond, brighter, faster, like a heartbeat. Ewan fired his flashlight. The beam cut through the fog, but there was nothing. Only the crate. Only the hum, now vibrating in his chest as if the dock itself had come alive. A sudden crash, the crane shifted slightly, chains rattling. Ewan dove aside as the crate teetered on the edge of the dock. For a moment, he swore it tilted of its own volition, leaning toward the river like it wanted to plunge into the dark water. His fingers scrambled over the steel edge, gripping pallets to keep his balance. Then it steadied. Calm returned. The vials pulsed once more, faintly blue, slower now, almost contemplative. Ewan exhaled shakily, convinced he had imagined the whole thing. But the metal beam above groaned as if disagreeing. Back at the hospital, Isla examined the vials under ultraviolet light again. She shivered. There was intent in their pulse, in the way the liquid refracted, hinting at cognition. She traced patterns with her finger, a foolish test, and the shimmer reacted, tiny waves racing along the glass. "They're not inert," she whispered to herself. "And they're not ours." Yuan's call came through the line. "Isla, you need to see this. The shipment, it's moving again." By the time she reached the dock, the container was gone. No trace, no footprints, no alarm triggered. Only the lingering hum in the steel and the faint pulse in her wrist, as though the city itself had remembered where the crate had been. The vaccine had arrived, unclaimed, untraceable. And whatever had sent it, whatever had guided it, was still watching. By morning, the city streets no longer resembled the Glasgow Isla had known. Empty cars sat abandoned in crumpled traffic, their engines rusting in the damp. The few humans who remained avoided the inoculated like ghosts. Yet the vaccinated moved through the streets with uncanny ease. Hamish Douglas and Callum Fraser appeared first, helping a cart of flour down a tilted alleyway. Their hands gripped the wheels, guiding the load with precision that defied weight. A woman struggling with a fallen lamppost glanced their way. Before she could call for help, the two lifted it free, not a strain showing in their posture. Nurse Brodie, dispatched to observe, whispered over the comms, "They're faster, stronger." No hesitation. Isla felt it too, watching from a distance. Their movements were graceful, calculated, almost rehearsed. Yet it was more than strength. Something about the way they oriented themselves in the world, their eyes scanning, their bodies anticipating, suggested awareness beyond human capability. She could not explain it. And that thought terrified her. That evening, a commotion erupted near the Clyde River docks. A collapsed warehouse threatened to crush a group of unvaccinated survivors taking shelter. Isla, Yuan, and a small patrol ran toward the chaos. Dust choked their lungs. The smell of copper, the same metallic tang from the hospital, lingered thick in the air. From the debris the vaccinated emerged. They moved like a single organism, limbs coordinating, hands lifting beams heavier than they should have been able to manage. Hamish and Callum worked together to free a trapped man, pushing steel girders aside as if they were twigs. They did not speak to each other. No words passed between them. Yet every action was perfectly synchronized. A smaller beam cracked under tension, threatening to fall onto Isla. Reflexively she dove aside, but a hand, impossibly fast, swept the beam out of the way, redirecting it harmlessly into the mud. She looked up. Hamish stood there, calm, eyes scanning her as though reading her fear. "They're protecting," Yuan said, voice low. "Not just themselves, everyone." The group of vaccinated moved again, forming a semicircle around the trapped survivors. In the shadows, Isla glimpsed something else, a shimmer at the edge of her vision, like the faint outline of an impossible shape. When she blinked, it was gone. Only the humans remained. Or almost humans. By the time the dust settled, no one was injured. The survivors whispered thanks, but the vaccinated did not reply. They walked away, back toward the city, surveying silently as if the streets themselves were a map only they could read. Isla touched the metallic tang in the air. "It's not just strength," she said, her voice shaking. "They perceive something we can't. They move in response to it." Yuan frowned. Like an instinct? Or like instructions? Before she could answer, a sudden rumble shook the street. A container truck, abandoned, tipped over, blocking their path. The vaccinated advanced without hesitation. They lifted it in unison, rolling it to the curb with hands that did not tremble, faces calm. Isla stepped back, heart racing. "Whatever this is," she whispered, "it's guiding them. And I don't think it's human." The city hummed faintly, the metallic tang lingering, a reminder that the streets themselves had become part of something other, something alive. And the vaccinated moved within it, perfect and silent, waiting for a signal none of the rest could hear. The call came just before dusk. A farmer in Aberdeenshire had reportedly broken through a steel barn door, rescuing his wife from beneath a fallen tractor. The local constable described it as impossible. The door had been reinforced, the machinery weighed nearly a ton, and no human could have moved it alone. Isla and Yuan drove through the rain-slick roads, headlights cutting through mist, the rhythmic patter of water on the windshield louder than the engine. By the time they reached the farm, the smell of copper was already heavy in the air, curling into their nostrils, unsettling and familiar. The scene was chaotic. The barn door lay twisted, the tractor wedged at an angle that should have trapped the farmer for hours. His wife, pale and shaking, clung to Hamish Douglas, now unmistakably present at the site, though Isla had no idea how he had arrived so quickly. He's unharmed," the constable stammered. "But the door." Isla knelt to inspect the bent steel. The hinges were twisted with a precision that suggested calculation, not brute force. And yet the edges were clean, no marks from tools, no splintered wood. "Stand back," Isla ordered, but before anyone could move, the farmer, Alexander Grant, stood upright. His posture was too straight, his muscles taut. He turned, eyes scanning the horizon, then the barn, then the tractor, with awareness that seemed to extend beyond the immediate space. Without warning, the tractor shifted under his hands, tilting upright as if obeying some silent command. Isabel's stomach churned. It wasn't just strength. It was control, understanding the object's weight, balance, and resistance instinctively. Hamish stepped forward, fingers tracing shapes in the air above the broken machinery. A faint shimmer rippled where his hands passed, subtle enough to be seen only at the corner of the eye. Dust and debris trembled, then settled perfectly. The effect was brief but undeniable. Ewan's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, though instinct warned him it was useless. "Isla, what the hell is happening?" "They perceive more than we do," she said, voice low. "They feel forces we can't even measure." A sudden groan from the barn made them spin. A support beam threatened to fall. Alexander moved faster than humanly possible, catching it and guiding it into place, saving a small boy who had wandered into the area. The movement was effortless, precise, alien in its grace. Isla took a cautious step forward. "Alexander, can you hear me?" He turned, eyes unblinking, scanning her as if reading her intent. "I can. But I do not need to answer." The copper tang thickened, curling into their noses and throats, making each breath taste metallic, alive. Isla realized it wasn't just scent, it was presence. Something larger than the humans in the field, something guiding them subtly, imperceptibly. The farmer's wife wept quietly, clinging to Hamish. "I don't understand," she whispered. "They saved you," Isla said, but even as she spoke, she wondered if saving was a word the vaccinated would recognize. It felt human, maybe too human. By the time Isla and Ewan left Aberdeenshire, the farm was silent. The vaccinated had moved on, leaving no trace of their path, except for twisted steel and the faint shimmer in the air, a residue of intent too subtle to measure. Ewan muttered under his breath, "It's like they're not just stronger. They're guided." "By what? I don't know." Isla didn't answer. She only knew that every step she took made the copper tang linger longer in her lungs. Something had arrived with the vaccine, and it was quietly shaping those it touched. And the question that would not leave her: were they guiding the humans or were the humans guiding themselves? Isla stood over the centrifuge, waiting as the machine whirred, spinning vials of blood faster than human eyes could follow. The lab smelled of antiseptic and faint copper, a lingering echo from the wards. Every vaccinated patient she had examined had left the same impression: strength, awareness, and precision beyond human comprehension. But what lay in their blood? Ewan had accompanied her that morning, skeptical, but his own unease was clear. "You really think it'll show anything?" he asked, leaning against a counter. "Something must," Isla muttered. She pricked her finger with a needle, careful, and placed a drop of her own blood under the microscope. Normal. Predictable. Then she set the vaccinated samples in sequence. The first slide revealed faint luminescence. Not fluorescence, not the chemical glow of reagents. Something else. Tiny structures shimmered within the plasma, moving against the flow, almost as though alive. Isla leaned closer. "They're organizing," she whispered. "Not randomly." Ewan peered over her shoulder, but blinked and the shimmer seemed to still itself. "You see that?" "I see. Something I can't name," Isla admitted. As they continued their analysis, the lights flickered. The hum of the centrifuge deepened, resonating through the lab. The vials themselves seemed to pulse faintly, blue against the white light of the microscopes. Isla's fingers trembled. The hum grew louder, vibrating in her bones. Suddenly the lab door slammed open. Hamish and Callum stood there, faces calm, eyes unblinking. Isla's first instinct was to push them back. Protocol, quarantine. But the moment she moved, the vials on the counter shifted, tiny ripples moving across the surface as if responding to them. "Step back," Ewan said, hand on his gun. Hamish tilted his head, scanning the vials, then gestured subtly. The liquid in the tubes rose slightly, forming arcs that defied gravity for a heartbeat, shimmering in the blue light. Ewan's jaw tightened. What the hell? Isla realized too late that they weren't doing anything consciously, at least not in a human sense. Their perception extended into the lab itself. The blood, the air, the machines, they all responded subtly, perfectly to some unseen rhythm. Then an alarm blared. One of the centrifuges was failing, spinning too fast. Normally, a catastrophic rupture would follow, sending glass and blood across the room. But Hamish moved a hand over the machine, and it steadied, vibration smoothing, the alarm silenced as if obeying an unspoken command. Isla staggered back. They're stabilizing it. With what? Callum's voice was calm, almost distant. It listens, and we listen to it. What listens? Ewan demanded, fear creeping into his tone. Callum looked at him, eyes unblinking. Something older than this lab, older than you, older than your city. Before Isla could reply, a flash of movement caught her eye, a ripple across the microscope slides, as though the structures inside were forming patterns too complex to be natural. They shimmered, pulsing faintly blue, tiny yet deliberate. Isla felt a cold realization. The vaccine had done more than heal the sick. It had linked them to something external, something aware, something patient. The blood was not just alive, it was resonant, attuned to a presence they could neither see nor measure, and it obeyed the vaccinated with perfect fidelity. Ewan backed toward the door, unease plain in his posture. We can't contain this. No, Isla admitted. We might not be able to understand it either. And yet, even as fear clawed at her, she knew they would have to try. Because whatever had arrived in the vaccine was listening, and it was only beginning to act. By the seventh night, Glasgow had quieted to an uneasy lull. The vaccinated moved through the streets in silence, their presence marked only by subtle distortions in the air, dust shifting along invisible currents, shadows bending just slightly out of line. Isla and Ewan followed from a distance, hearts pounding with the sense that something enormous was happening just beyond human perception. It began at the ruins of an abandoned textile factory. The vaccinated gathered without speech. Hamish and Callum arrived first, standing at the factory entrance, surveying the structure as if reading its bones. One by one, the others arrived, moving with measured steps, synchronized in a way that suggested awareness extending beyond individual thought. Then the work began. Beams, crates, and discarded machinery were shifted effortlessly. Walls were propped, floors rebuilt, metal bent to impossible angles. The observers, Isla and Ewan, could only watch, breath held. The vaccinated worked as though guided by a vision no human could comprehend. Hamish traced arcs in the air, and where his fingers passed, dust trembled and objects shifted slightly, aligning themselves perfectly. A sudden groan of collapsing steel broke the night. A ceiling truss fell toward a pile of machinery, threatening to crush Hamish. Without warning, Callum leapt forward, placing his hands under the beam. It hovered briefly, tilting in midair as though repelled by an unseen force, and then settled safely onto the floor. Isla's stomach nodded. It's not just strength, she whispered. They're guided. Ewan's eyes darted nervously. Guided by what? A faint pulse of blue light rippled across the machinery, subtle but undeniable. It seemed to respond to the vaccinated, almost like a current of awareness flowing through the objects themselves. The copper tang thickened, curling in the air, hinting at presence, something vast and patient. Suddenly, one of the younger vaccinated children climbed atop a crate, pointing to a corner of the factory. Hamish nodded, moving with precision, and a section of the floor shifted, sliding into place without sound. Another pile of steel bent upward, forming a structure that appeared to defy logic. Isla realized that they weren't just stacking or repairing, they were constructing something alien in intent, using human materials. A loud crash echoed from outside. A patrol drone sent to observe had tipped over. Ewan ran toward it, but before he could reach the machine, Hamish and Callum moved in unison. The drone hovered again, upright, stabilized without touching it. Its sensors blinked erratically, unable to read the subtle forces acting upon it. They're controlling it, Ewan said, voice tight. They're responding, Isla corrected. To something we can't see. Something in the air, in the structures, or maybe inside themselves. The construction continued into the night. By dawn, the factory had been transformed. Walls and beams aligned with geometric precision, a faint shimmer of blue light reflecting off angles that should not have caught it. The structures were complete, but Isla could not guess their purpose. They were not human designs. They were deliberate, alien, and utterly silent. As she and Ewan withdrew to the street, the copper tang lingered, thicker than ever. The vaccinated remained inside, silent sentinels of a presence no one could name. And somewhere beyond their perception, the force guiding them watched, patient and indifferent. Isla shivered. Humanity had survived the plague, yes, but it was no longer certain whether the world they returned to belonged to them. Isla had warned herself not to go alone, but the summons from the ministry demanded immediate presence. The docklands were empty at dusk, fog rolling in from the river, obscuring the piles of shipping containers and rusted cranes. Every step echoed across the concrete, swallowed quickly by the mist. Yuan followed closely, gun holstered but hand near the grip. "You sure about this?" he whispered. Isla tightened her coat around her. "If I don't confront them, nothing makes sense. And I still don't understand what we're dealing with." At the end of the pier, the minister stood beneath the skeletal frame of an abandoned warehouse. His presence was oddly commanding, almost magnetic, and the copper tang in the air thickened as they approached. "Dr. McCrae," he said, voice calm but precise, each word deliberate. "I wondered when you would come." Isla stepped forward. "You know what this vaccine is doing. You've seen it yourself. Why lie to me?" The minister's pupils flickered strangely in the dim light, contracting and dilating in a rhythm that made Isla uneasy. "Lie," he said. "We only do what survival demands. These are extraordinary times." Callum Fraser emerged from the shadows, Hamish at his side. The two stood silently, their presence almost like a shield. The minister glanced at them briefly, then back at Isla. "They respond differently," Isla said. "Do you know what they are capable of?" "They are enhanced," he replied smoothly. "As are we now. Survival required it." Yuan's hand twitched toward his gun. "You've taken it too, haven't you?" The minister's voice did not waver. "Yes. And so have others who need to make decisions for those still weak enough to need guidance." Before Isla could speak, a sudden clang erupted from the nearby containers. A shipping crate shifted violently, tipping as though pulled by a force unseen. Hamish and Callum moved instantly, intercepting it. With their hands outstretched, the crate righted itself, sliding to the dock with precision that defied physics. The minister's eyes followed the movement calmly, but a faint blue pulse shimmered in his gaze, reflecting off the wet metal surfaces. Isla felt the same pulse, subtle but insistent, resonating through the dock itself. "They are listening," Isla muttered. "They are responding," the minister corrected, voice low. "Not to us. To the same thing that brought the vaccine here. You cannot control it. None of us can. You can only guide it." Yuan's jaw tightened. "Guide it? You mean manipulate it?" The minister shook his head. "We interpret. We act. But it does not belong to us." A gust of wind rattled the containers. Isla's eyes caught movement at the edges of her vision. A shimmer, faint and almost imperceptible, bending the mist around the dock. The copper tang thickened, crawling into her throat. She realized, with a shiver, that the vaccine had brought something else with it. Something alive, something aware, that extended through the vaccinated and now even through the minister. Then a crate collapsed nearby, narrowly missing Yuan. Without thinking, Callum and Hamish moved in unison, guiding the falling steel with effortless strength. Their actions were precise, anticipatory, almost premeditated, but it was unclear whether they knew how or why. Isla's voice was barely audible. "It's not human. Whatever this is, it's guiding them." The minister's pupils flickered again. "And it will guide us all eventually. You can resist if you wish, but you cannot hide. It has already touched your world." A second gust swept across the dock, stronger this time, carrying the faint hum of an invisible current. Isla's heart raced as the blue pulses in the crates intensified, reflecting off the water. Whatever had come with the vaccine was patient, silent, and vast, and the vaccinated were only its instruments. For the first time Isla understood, the vaccine had worked. But the survivors of the plague might no longer be the same species that had fallen ill. The ledger was hidden deep in the ministry's archives, beneath floors that had not seen human footfalls in decades. Ewan MacLeod had pried it from a rusted filing cabinet, keys rattling in his pocket. Each page was thick with dust and age, yet the entries were precise, careful, almost obsessive. Isla read aloud, shipment dates, codes, destinations. None matched the outbreak timeline. Some were decades old. All were marked with symbols no human bureaucracy could explain. They hinted at preparation, decades of waiting for a crisis just like this one. "They planned for this," Isla whispered. "Long before the fever struck. But why? And why the vaccine?" Ewan's eyes narrowed. "It wasn't made for us." Outside, the vaccinated moved in patterns Isla could not decipher. Hamish and Callum crossed streets, lifting fallen vehicles, riding collapsed scaffolds, guiding groups of survivors without a word. Their actions were precise, coordinated, almost ritualistic. Yet nothing they did suggested malice. The humans they touched were preserved, protected, but reshaped by their presence. Isla turned back to the ledger. One entry caught her attention. Activation protocol initiated. Host compatibility confirmed. What does it mean? She asked, voice shaking. Yuan swallowed hard. It means we volunteered. Without knowing it. The vaccine wasn't intended to heal humans. It was meant to prepare us for something else. A sudden roar shook the city. A bridge had collapsed nearby, steel snapping with a scream of protest. The vaccinated surged toward it, moving with impossible speed. Isla and Yuan followed, hearts pounding. At the bridge, a group of unvaccinated survivors were trapped. The steel was too twisted for any human to lift. Hamish and Callum arrived first. Their hands hovered over the metal and it shifted, tilted, rolled and settled into safe angles. The other vaccinated joined in, coordinating with instinctive precision. The humans on the bridge scrambled to safety, eyes wide with terror and awe. Yuan stared at the scene, voice hoarse. They're doing it without touching most of it. How? Isla swallowed, copper tang thick in her throat. They sense it. They feel what the structure needs. Not like a tool, like an extension of themselves. Or of something else. Above, the city trembled again. Isla glimpsed a shimmer in the clouds, faint blue ripples pulsing across the skyline. It was as if the atmosphere itself was responding, bending to a rhythm only the vaccinated could detect. They're not human anymore, Yuan said, voice low. And whatever guided the vaccine, it's still out there. Hamish turned toward them, eyes unblinking. No expression passed his face, yet Isla felt a silent message. Observe. Learn. Wait. The realization settled over her. The vaccine had not saved humanity in the way they thought. It had merely made them compatible hosts, humans enhanced, guided, linked to something beyond comprehension. Something patient. Something that had been waiting. And it was only beginning to act. Months had passed since the first inoculations. Scotland was quiet in a way that felt wrong. The streets of Glasgow and Aberdeen were free of fever, free of the dying, but also free of the life that had once belonged there. Where humans had survived, they now moved differently, subtle changes in posture, in perception, in awareness. Isla walked among them, notebook abandoned. The vaccinated had become something else. Hamish and Callum led groups without a word. Others followed their cues instinctively, bending and lifting, protecting and building, their actions precise, almost ritualistic. The copper tang lingered everywhere, faint in the air, a reminder of the unseen presence that guided them. Ewan MacLeod joined her on the ridge above the city, looking down at the orderly streets. I don't think the ministry understands, he said quietly. Or maybe they do and they just bow to it. Isla shook her head. We survived the fever. But at what cost? This isn't just recovery. It's adaptation. They were never meant to be human in the way we understood it. Below, a group of vaccinated moved in perfect alignment, rescuing a collapsed scaffold without hesitation. Their eyes caught hers briefly, unblinking, distant. She realized they saw more than she could, felt more than she could. They were aware of forces in the air, the city, the land, forces she could not name. A faint ripple in the clouds above mirrored the shimmer she had seen months ago. It pulsed slowly as if acknowledging the humans below, confirming their transformation. Ewan looked at her. So, what remains human? She exhaled slowly. The choices we still make. The fear we still feel. The questions we still ask. But the world itself, it belongs to them now and to whatever is guiding them. We can survive. We might even thrive. But we'll never be the same. In the distance, Hamish and Callum moved toward the river, guiding floating debris to form a stable passage for fishermen stranded by floods. The faint blue shimmer followed them, reflecting in the water like ripples from a stone dropped into a still lake. Isla felt both awe and dread. The vaccine had worked. The fever was gone. But humanity in its traditional form was a memory now. And the force behind the change, the intelligence woven into the inoculation, remained silent and patient, watching, waiting, shaping the survivors into something new. She turned to Ewan. We can't fight it. We can only understand it. And maybe learn from it. He nodded slowly, eyes on the horizon. Then let's start learning. The wind carried the faint metallic tang through the empty streets. Somewhere above, the shimmer pulsed again, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. The city held its breath and the future waited, imperfect, alien and human all at once. Rain lashed against the shattered windows of the ministry compound in Edinburgh. The city lay hushed, streets emptied not by curfew but by caution. Word had spread, farmers lifting machinery, children speaking with voices too measured, eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. The vaccinated were no longer merely patients. Dr. Isla McRae stood with Detective Ewan McLeod at the top of the stairwell, breath ragged, each inhalation tinged with the now familiar copper tang. Below, a dozen figures moved through the ministry's main hall. Men, women, children, all of them recipients of the foreign vaccine. Their motions were precise, synchronized without words. "Do you see it?" Ewan's whisper barely carried. His hand hovered over his sidearm, though he knew its futility. "I do." Isla's voice cracked. She could feel it, not just in her eyes but in her skin, her bones. Each gesture below seemed to ripple against her own nerves, as if their thoughts brushed hers without permission. One of them, Hamish Douglas, lifted his head. His gaze found her instantly. The boy's lips parted, not in speech but in understanding, acknowledgement that carried the weight of command. Isla felt her knees weaken, her mind recoil at the sense of scale. "They're not human anymore," Ewan muttered. "They're more than human." Isla forced herself upright. "And we gave it to them." Below, the group approached a reinforced wall, steel doors meant to withstand rioters, fire, even explosions. Alexander Grant, the farmer from Aberdeenshire, placed his palm against the metal. No strain showed on his face. The door yielded with a groan, steel bending outward like softened wax. Ewan swore under his breath. "If they can do that here." "They're not destroying," Isla interrupted sharply. Her pulse pounded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the scene. "They're reshaping." The copper tang thickened until every breath was like drinking metal. Isla swayed, clutching the stairwell rail. For a moment, just a moment, she saw more. The world folded. A lattice of forces, unseen currents pressing and pulling, a language written not in words but in weight, balance, and motion. The vaccinated moved through it as if born to it. One of the beams from the ceiling shifted, strained by storm winds. It cracked loose, plunging toward the crowd. Isla cried out, but Alexander caught it mid-fall, guiding the mass of steel aside with an elegance that defied gravity. The beam landed without a sound, perfectly upright, as if it had always belonged there. Hamish turned back toward Isla, eyes unblinking. "You will not stop this," his voice carried into her skull, though his lips never moved. She staggered back, heart hammering while rising. "They're building something," she whispered. "Not here. Not for us." Ewan pulled her by the arm, forcing her away from the stairwell toward the exit. Behind them, the group stepped into the storm, their silhouettes outlined by lightning. For one terrible instant, Isla thought she saw vast shapes moving in the rain, invisible but implied, structures, forms, presences, pressing close to the earth, unseen by those unaltered. The copper taste lingered in her throat long after they fled into the night. "They're not waiting anymore," Ewan said, his voice low, steady in the darkness. "No," Isla closed her eyes, trembling. "They're beginning." And the storm over Edinburgh did not feel like weather anymore. By dawn the city was not the same. Edinburgh's skyline shimmered faintly, as though the storm had left more than water behind. Rooftops gleamed with dew that glowed faintly blue in the early light. The air vibrated, not with sound but with presence. Isla and Ewan crouched on Calton Hill, watching from above. The vaccinated moved through the streets, small clusters that never spoke aloud, yet shifted as one. They were not rioting. They were not conquering. They were arranging, lifting girders, bending steel, guiding stone blocks into patterns too precise for accident. "God help us," Ewan muttered. "It's not random. It's design." Isla gripped her knees, her breath shallow. She remembered the shimmer Hamish had drawn in the air, the way debris had fallen into order, not chaos. She saw it again now, expanded, the whole city slowly folding into a shape she could not name. "Not design," she whispered. "Instruction." As the sun broke over the horizon, the glow deepened. Above the Firth of Forth, clouds split apart. For a heartbeat Isla thought it was only weather, then the outline revealed itself, vast geometric angles too sharp for nature. Something was descending not from the sky but through it. The vaccinated paused, lifted their heads as one, and exhaled a long steady breath that made the copper tang flood Isla's mouth until she gagged. Ewan pulled her back behind the ridge. His face was pale, jaw set. "We have to leave. We have to warn them, Glasgow, London." "Warn them of what?" Isla's voice trembled, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "That we invited them? That our cure was never ours? That the vaccine wasn't medicine, it was a signal?" Lightning tore across the morning sky, but the light did not fade. It held, steady, deliberate, outlining something immense above the North Sea. Isla felt her body seize, nerves singing with alien rhythm. For an instant, her thoughts weren't her own. A whisper, not words but intent, slid into her mind. You are not prey. You are foundation. She gasped, shoving the thought away, but her knees shook with the effort. Yuan caught her before she fell. Isla, what did you hear? Her eyes brimmed with fear and something colder. She couldn't look at him. Not yet. They're not just here to change us, she said. They're here to build. And we're the ground they'll build on. The sound from the sea grew louder, metallic, resonant, like a cathedral bell tolling through the bones of the earth. The first structures in Edinburgh rose higher, precise and gleaming, reaching toward the impossible shape above. And Isla knew, whatever was arriving, it wasn't coming. It was already here.